Friday, January 24th. I'm Adam Walsh, and this is The Signal. Join us for a trip back in time today, back to the years around Confederation. Today on the show, we are talking about a project called Letters to Joey, a collection of letters to the former premier about people's concerns, stories, their lives, hopes, and dreams. And before we get to my fantastic guests, both in studio and on the line today, if we're doing a story about letters to Joey Smallwood, we may as well hear from him. Here's a short clip from an interview with Joey Smallwood back in 1948. Take a listen.
Well, we're not thinking so much of what Canada will be able to do for us as of the things which will happen quite naturally to Newfoundland after struggling along for 4.5 centuries.
Is it really as long as that?
Yes, 451 years on the 24th of June past.
And what sort of things will naturally happen?
Well, for one thing, our cost of living will be reduced. It should come down closer to the Canadian level, because we won't have to go on paying a tariff on Canadian imports.
Well, we think that cost of living is high enough here.
The Canadian cost of living may be high compared with a year or more ago, but compared with Newfoundland, it's very low. We pay 29 cents for milk and 18 cents for a loaf of bread. And beef is 90 cents a pound.
90 cents a pound for beef. Cost of living concerns, tariff issues. What year are we talking there? Anyways, Joey Smallwood, 1948, just as, I guess it was just after the 52.3% of Newfoundland voted in support to join Canada. Today on the show, like I said, Letters to Joey. As you're listening, the Signal at cbc.ca for emails. If you want to call the Signal line and leave us a message, 709-576-5260. Joining me on the line, we've got Sonja Boon, who's an adjunct professor in the Department of Gender Studies at Memorial University, but on a writing residency right now. How you doing?
I'm great, actually. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks for coming on. Briefly tell us about the writing residency, if you could.
Well, I'm here for 3 months, which is a real delight, to focus on writing and also to focus on mentoring other writers in the community here. So I'll be having some workshops and one-on-one sessions as well.
Yes, excellent, with the University of Manitoba. And joining us here in studio, we've got Vicki Hallett, Associate Professor in the Department of Gender Studies, Heidi Coombs, Historian in Newfoundland and Labrador Women's History, and Terry Bishop-Stirling, Retired Professor from the Department of History and a contributor to the project. How are you all doing?
Excellent. Thanks, Adam.
Let's start. Sonja, let's start with you. Tell folks, I gave like a little introduction there, but tell folks about the project, and then we'll ask the people here in studio, and we'll start to go through some letters and have a grand old chat.
Perfect. Yeah, no, Vicki and I got together at one point, maybe even 2018, and we started thinking about these letters in relation to the 75th anniversary of Confederation. These letters were introduced to me by Terry, who's in your studio, and they're just such a fabulous collection. And we said, can we do a project that doesn't focus only on Joey? Our original first line was, this is not a book about Joey Smallwood, because we wanted to focus on how everyday folks experienced and understood Confederation, how they understood themselves as political agents, what this meant for them, and that's what we wanted to center. And the letters to Smallwood in the archives and special collections at MUN are a great resource for that.
Yeah, it's the inputs, right? What people were saying, what they were sending to the man, not about who he is or what he was about, but to hear from all around the province and about how folks were feeling. So, Vicki, as this started to get, you had the idea, then what happens?
Mm-hmm. So Sonja and I started talking about this, as she said, back in 2018. And then we had to sort of think about, how do we want to go about this? And there are so many letters. I mean, the archive is enormous. So we knew that we couldn't just go in there and try and do it ourselves. So we really wanted to not only focus on the letters from, people around the province, but also to sort of spread the love and get a lot of people involved who we thought would be really great, including Heidi and Terry, who are here with us. So we thought, who can we reach out to? Who do we know that would be interested in going to the archive and digging around? So we started making a list of, people that we knew who were super intelligent and super curious and who would be invested in this. And we started reaching out to people because we wanted different people's perspectives on these letters as well, because as broad a breadth of opinions and views as there are in the archive, there are as many, in the community who want to read about these things. So that was our next step.
When you say a lot of letters, like what are we talking about?
Thousands of letters. I mean, all of Joey Smallwood's papers are at the archives and special collections. He specifically donated all of his material to that archive instead of the provincial archives, for example. So everything that he ever had is housed there. So all these letters run his entire time in office. All those letters are there. So we just picked this small section of letters.
All right. So Terry, what was it like as things started to get rolling? Right, the idea for the project is out. And we're getting a team together. What were the first steps like as you started kind of diving into things?
Well, the first step for me was to dive into the letters and just see what was there. And as Vicki said, there are so many. It's how to focus, because each piece was fairly small. I looked at the district of Grand Falls, which was a very big and varied district. And so it was, I read letters. I have an interest in women's history, so I was reading letters from women. I was reading letters from fishermen and farmers and mill workers, and interesting things going on in Gander, which was a town very much in transition out of World War II. But I ended up focusing on loggers because I thought that was so important in that particular district. So I looked at loggers' letters, and as we know, 10 years later, we have the IWA strike in that district, the loggers' strike, which perhaps the most controversial and bitter strike in the province's history. So I think for a lot of us, it was a matter of going in and finding out, how am I going to focus this? I can't do everything, so what are we going to focus on?
Yeah, focus. Just thinking with my journalism hat, right? Focus is really important. If you're going to have a project, if anything from a news story that's 2 minutes to a documentary to a series to a giant project like this, you need to have focus. Heidi, what about yourself as you started?
Well, originally, Vicki and Sonja asked me to write one of the context pieces because there are essays in the book that focus on the history, and so that you can understand the letters within the historical context. But then when I found out about the letters and the reflection piece, I said, well, I want to get in on that too.
You're like, there's a candy shop here. I need to enjoy it all.
Exactly. So fortunately or unfortunately, there were so many of us involved that I couldn't do all the districts. So fortunately, I was forced to I did White Bay, so I had only one district to read the letters for, and it was still hard to focus on anything in particular because there were so many different requests. There's so many people from different backgrounds and different experiences and different needs and different hopes and requests and opinions. So the letters are just so rich. And at the end of the day, for my reflection piece, I did focus on only one letter because it spoke to me so strongly. And I had to, unfortunately, not talk about the letter about requesting a jukebox or a license for homebrew. I had to put all those really interesting letters aside because I did focus very specifically on one letter that was about a healthcare situation.
All right. Well, first, can we set some context, like create the picture of this province from 48 to 51, and like, I guess you want to jump, and then we can do like a whip around for we can kind of build the bridge together for everyone who's listening to get this a short kind of historical Reader's Digest version of a place and time and events.
Well, one of the first thing that I say about Confederation and the history of Confederation is that there's not one history of Confederation. Yeah. There are many. Well put. And not everybody had the same experience. Not everybody benefited the same way. And there's a real difference between the Outports and St. John's. And a lot of the letters, and I read White Bay, so it was all rural Newfoundlanders, and they were trying to make a living. And a lot of people were just getting by. I couldn't believe how many letters I read that were asking for seed potatoes. And to be honest, I got really annoyed with that because I was going through the letters and I was, oh my God, not another letter asking for seed potatoes. And then it's probably only in the past year or so, because these letters are still with me. I randomly think of them throughout at any given point. And it dawned on me how significant that is, that so many people were writing to the Premier asking for seed potatoes. They could have asked for anything. Because he had built their hopes up and built up these expectations that he could provide for them. And what did they ask for? Seed potatoes. Because they needed food.
That is striking, right?
Yep.
Seed potatoes. Another letter of seed potatoes. And then you start to think, oh, wait, obviously, sure. That's, you're not going to gaze seed. You're emailing. You're mailing the Premier asking for potato seeds, right?
Yeah.
Sonja, what about yourself for context? Anything you want to toss in here?
I guess what I would want to say is that, people had long histories. The people who wrote to Smallwood had a long history. So they're not only talking about Confederation, they're talking about their experience of commission government before it.
Yeah.
And they're talking about their experience of responsible government before that point. Like, they're talking about various things. They're not just only looking at this is right now. So when they are writing to Smallwood, they're writing with their experience looking back and what they want going forward. So we've got a place that's coming out of the war, but also coming out of these years of commission government. Suddenly there's a lot of change on the horizon. What's changed as a result of the war, with troops coming in terms of social relations as a result of the war? We have, for example, war brides sometimes writing to Smallwood saying, okay, what's the situation now? I got married during the war, but now my husband has disappeared, or whatever, right? But you also have new communications infrastructure. You have this aim to have something possibly different. So the National Convention is a chance to imagine something completely different. What is that different going to look like? And I think that this is what some of the people writing to Smallwood tap into, this idea of what could that different look like. So they're not just asking for seed potatoes, which is super important for the everyday, but that question for seed potatoes is also a question of how can we do something different so we don't need to ask you for seed potatoes, right? So there's one letter that one of our contributors, Jasmine Paul, chose, was a letter about a guy who writes about the price of apples. And he says, when I was a kid, price of apples was 1 cent, and if you got a really big apple, it was 2 cents. And then under commission government, that went up to 6 or 7 cents. And that becomes really impossible because if you have 6 or 7 kids, you can't be sending 6 or 7 cents per kid for them to get an apple. And then he says, but here we are in Confederation, and how come the apples are still expensive and the oranges? Why is it still so high? It makes me think of that little excerpt you had at the beginning. Why is the price still so high? Because you want to have kids to be having apples and oranges, because otherwise they're going to get TB, all sorts of things. And we talk about TB, but you're talking about apples and oranges. They're too expensive. So you give us a family allowance, but the merchants are taking it. So how does this all work? So it's interesting how he links back to his own childhood and moves his way forward. The apples are not just about apples. They're about healthcare, and they're about a future.
In the 20th century, to think of the damage, the massive damage from the First World War, and then that leading to commission of government from 33 to 49. I'm just thinking about a poly-sci degree here. The Second World War in there. Before that, the Great Depression. And then you're hitting into a baby boom. And so we've got all of this, plus joining Canada, all this in the mix of what's happening around this time. Vicki, what about yourself for some context that stands out?
Yeah, I just really love what Heidi said. It was different for everyone in the province. Really different regions had different issues. I think about Labrador and the fact that they didn't have any representation in the Newfoundland government until they were asked about Confederation. Right. That was kind of their first chance to have the franchise, to really have a say. And so we did find that there was kind of a dearth of letters from the Labrador district, but partly that can be explained by the fact that it was kind of their first time having a chance to have a say provincially, when it became a province. They had sort of been, really unrepresented until that time. And so, people in Labrador that we did hear from in the letters were, concerned about similar issues. but some of them were sort of saying, is this our chance to get on a sort of level playing field with Newfoundland? So there's a woman who writes, and she says, I'm wondering if, the people down in Labrador will be treated like Newfoundland people are treated. They've never were treated like Newfoundlanders by the government. And so what are you going to do for us in Labrador now? And that's an ongoing issue,
yeah,
right?
That conversation continues now.
That continues. So it's fascinating to see how so many of these issues do carry on into the present day. But that certainly stands out for us. And the letters from Labrador were amazing. I mean, there are so many great letters from all over the province. But that strikes me, and thinking about one of the things that struck us too is that you can sort of be seduced into the belief that because there are so many letters and they do represent all 25 districts, at the time there were 25 electoral districts, Labrador was a new one, you can think that, this represents everyone. Everyone was here and everyone's speaking. This gives us such a great representative sample. It does, and it doesn't.
Who else is missing?
Who's missing? Whose voices are not here? What are we not hearing? Who are we not hearing from, and why? So we sort of had to think about that, right, as we were writing. And, some of the folks who wrote reflections talked about that. And, what is it that's not being said? What are we not hearing? And that's important, as important as what we do hear in these letters.
Terry, what about yourself?
Yeah, and I think what Vicki just said about Labrador in particular, and Sonja mentioned it too, that I think the National Convention and the broadcasting of the National Convention repoliticized people. So what you see with these letter writers is that they were engaged in politics. They were, many of them talked about listening to the National Convention, taking part in the debates, voting, and they are continuing. They are now quite engaged.
Like invigorated after having the old time out from democracy.
Right. For sure. And the other context that I saw in a lot of the letters was, and I think it actually, I thought of it when you played the clip from Smallwood about things that would happen naturally. And I think people coming out of World War II and perhaps having worked on the bases, some of the men being in Europe, is that people were looking for modernization of infrastructure. So there were a lot of letters about better communication, more radio. People wanted radios, railway lines, branch lines, better roads, electrification, all of those things, those sort of modern things that were missing in a lot of areas. There was a lot of request for that. I know certainly in terms of, some of the letters that Heidi looked at, people seeking medical help, if there was a radio, if we could get to a hospital more easily. So there was a lot of that in the letters as well, I found.
Because in rural parts of you're talking electrification was into the 50s and early 60s, same with the plumbing situation for folks, for a lot of people, right? Which is different than the St. John's situation by a lot, even though, I remember my nan telling me a story about the 50s when they were at Munn, staying in Mundy Pond with an outhouse, but they still had electricity. But anyways, it's just to talk about the march forward of what was needed. Sonja, you want to, anything, I heard you there, do you want to, any thoughts to build on here from the conversation? Because I'll go to Heidi to talk about the medical situation after.
Yeah, certainly. What Terry was talking about, electrification, I was just rereading a letter this morning about someone who said, so why don't we have electricity when this town a mile over has electricity, right? So why is that happening? And why don't we have this? But also back to Vicki's point around who we don't hear from in the letters, it's an interesting group of people who you don't hear from. So, for example, in some ways, the very obvious people that you wouldn't hear from, obviously the people who either are illiterate or who are illiterate and don't have anyone to write for them, of course, wouldn't be writing to Smallwood. The people who can't write in English, they're not going to be writing to Smallwood. So that would leave out probably a lot of Indigenous folks who wouldn't be writing in English to write to Smallwood. You have people who were institutionalized, much less likely to be able to write because unless they were able to write themselves or have someone write for them. But then the other part of it is that the very most privileged people, you see some letters from them, but not as many as others. So I suspect, that's my suspicion, they had other avenues to talk to Smallwood.
Yeah, or they saw him directly.
Yeah, exactly. They didn't need to, at a social event or wherever, they didn't need to write a letter. So it's interesting to think about who isn't there. There's probably some people who didn't want to be seen, because maybe it was risky for them to be seen. Even if they had a lot of needs, even if they had a lot of political opinions, a lot of ideas, it was maybe too risky for them to write a letter, because suddenly that would put them in a precarious situation. And we do see some letters where people anonymize themselves, and they write on behalf of a daughter. They write on behalf of a situation in their community, but they're not putting their names to it. So this sense of risk certainly was a real factor.
Heidi, talk to us about that one that stood out for you. And others, but we'll start with one and go from there.
I didn't bring that one with me. It's a longer one, but it was about a woman who wrote to Smallwood, and she was advocating for better health care services for her community and also communications. They didn't have a telephone in the community. They had no roads. And they were, in the wintertime, they were cut off from other communities. So the bay where this community is would get jammed with ice. And it was really, as you know, unpredictable. So the bay could be full of ice for weeks on end, and then the wind will shift and it opens up, and then the wind would shift again and it would fill in again. So this was a family. They had a 5-month-old baby boy who was sick, and it was January 15th. They realized they needed medical help. There was a Grenfell nurse nearby, but, well, by nearby I mean something like 15 miles away and across the bay, and you had to go then on dog sled to get to the station. So the father got there, but the nurse couldn't leave because she had a maternity case, and she was responsible for 100 miles of coastline.
Right.
No roads. So if she had a call, she had to go by dog sled or boat. There was, the Grenfell Mission did have an air ambulance, but only one, and it was, they had a large territory to cover. So anyway, they went home with tablets for the baby. Baby didn't get better, so they realized they had to bring the baby themselves back to the nursing station. And long story short, the baby never made it through the night. The nurse tried all weekend to get the air ambulance, but couldn't. And they were getting up Tuesday morning to go by dog sled to one community and then snowmobile to get to St. Anthony, and the baby had passed away that morning. So then the mother had to trek all the way back to her home community with her dead baby. And she stayed with strangers on the way. People in the two communities she praised them. She said, they were so kind to me. Nobody could change the situation or bring my baby back, but I thank the people in the community. And she got on Smallwood's case. She said, now, listen here, this is what I went through. I will never get over it as long as I live. We need better medical care here. We need a telephone, and we need roads. And that area did get better, more nursing stations in the years following. So I like to think that her advocacy played a role in that.
Yeah, that's quite the story. And what year was that for that one?
That was 52.
52.
And I have telegrams here actually from someone else in the same district from May 49, whose wife had fallen, and they wanted an air ambulance, and they contacted St. John's, and the Premier sent one. In 1949. And they even said, one of these says, the telegram says, plane leaving around 4 o'clock. Oh my gosh, I'm having trouble reading this now. It says, please announce over Doyle's bulletin, if plane circles and does not land, go to the next community over, because the patient will have to go to another community because the plane wouldn't be able to. So they did send an airplane, and they announced over Doyle's bulletin that if it can't land, go to the next community, because there was no phone.
What was Doyle's bulletin?
The program on the radio. So the radio.
Radio.
Yes,
Hey?
radio.
Hey. Right, yeah. Oh,
Ew.
I like
Radio.
that idea.
Radio was huge, as Terry said, huge for Confederation, and it was a lifeline for people in the outports.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's how
a picture. You're painting a picture, right? Like what a
Yeah.
great picture. Well, I mean, a horrifying picture, but just to give you time and place. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, and that's what these letters do. The letters and telegrams, they paint this incredible picture of the time period and what people were really concerned about on the ground. And like you say, Terry, people were engaged, largely because of the radio. That was a huge way that, means of communication, and certainly one of the tools that Smallwood utilized in his, in his push for Confederation. He certainly, leveraged, as we like to say now, his stardom as the barrelman. I mean, that's for lots of people. They really knew Smallwood. They thought they knew Smallwood because he came into their homes so often, and they knew him as the barrelman. And so sometimes they would reference that in their letters. Oh, we know you. We heard you on the radio. But they were engaged, as Terry said, right, with these debates. They were listening to the convention. They were on top of things.
We've got Gina Snooks on the line.
Hi, Gina.
How you doing?
Very well, thank you.
All right. So
And yourself?
Good. So Gina has a PhD in gender studies, contributed for this project. Tell us about your involvement and just tell us about your involvement and thoughts around it.
Sure. So I've actually been fascinated by these letters since 2010 when I was taking a course. I was doing my bachelor's degree at Memorial University, and I was taking a course with Sonja. And Sonja had designed this really great assignment for us that we had to go into the archives and find a letter written by a woman from Newfoundland and Labrador, written to Smallwood, so that we would have to kind of use a letter as a starting point to do some research. And so when I went into the archives, I wanted the box of letters from the White Bay, because I was born in the White Bay, my mother was born and raised in the White Bay, her mother before her. So for me, it was really, really personal, and I wanted to see how the stories were connected. What I came across wasn't so much a letter, it was actually a telegram. And it was written in 1949, September 7th, 1949 to be exact. And it really struck me. It's 8 words. It says, destitute, received no money since March. Please advise.
Destitute, received no money since March. Please advise. That speaks a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It did. And I was really interested in what it didn't say.
Mm-hmm.
All of the stories. Why did this woman feel that she was destitute? Why did she feel like she should write to Smallwood and ask him for advice? What was the background? What was the story? What was all of that was going on that wasn't said in this telegraph? And it struck me when I read it about, how similar her story could be to other people's. So for myself, when I looked at the telegram and where it was sent from a post office that was very close to home. And so it made me think about what my grandmother was doing at the time that this telegraph was sent. My grandmother at the time had several small babies. My mother was barely 3 years old. My uncle was a newborn. And it really made me think about what were the similarities and also differences between their life stories, right? What made the difference?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's that word destitute. That's like,
Yeah.
I'm just thinking with kids, and for you to use that word, what is the picture in that household to use the word destitute?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so through the research, what I found out actually was that the woman at the time that she wrote the letter, she was around 70 years old. She was a widow. And so that, of course, raised questions about, the widow's allowance and old age pension, which were conversations that were happening on the radio around Confederation, right? And how the government was going to increase funding for folks. So that was part of her, so that was sort of part of her story, right?
Mm-hmm. And as this project has continued and continues, what other thoughts have been coming up around it, or anything? Like, has anything evolved for your thoughts around that time and place, or the meaning of it since being evolved after this experience that you just talked about?
Right. Well, I think the stories really hit. Like, I'm still fascinated by those 8 words.
Yeah.
And what they say and what they don't say. I think about when we go in the archives and we look at these stories, it is the word destitute that really stood out for me, and it's a word that it still sticks with me. But I was really fortunate to actually find out that I knew somebody who grew up next door to the woman who wrote this telegram. And so through this other woman, I learned that, she was a nice, quiet lady with gray hair. She lived with her daughter and her family. And I think that hearing those stories also was really important about her everyday life and what it might have been like. Not just the sadness, not just the destitute, but also the family life, the traditions, the connectedness in the community and things like that were also things that really stood out for me. So I think for me it's really important to think about why the word destitute is so important, and also to think about the bigger picture of how the stories are connected.
It's a heck of a puzzle piece to get for piece 1, right? When you're trying to put together a picture of family history, because sometimes it's a picture or it's a keepsake or whatever else. But to have those 8 words and then to kind of flesh it out with some other, talking and research, it's quite the thing.
It is, yeah.
Gina, thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing that. And I'll put it to the group here. And we've got one other call to make and some other stuff to read. But thank you very much for taking time out of your day to have this chat.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
All right,
Thanks, Gina.
Gina Snook's there from Fort Mac, or living in Fort Mac, from White Bay. Thoughts on this?
Just that many of our contributors did have family connections to the places, the districts that they chose and wanted to look into. And many people, spoke to us about how powerful it was to go in and read letters from, communities that were either their community or close by their community. It really is powerful. It gives you a very different sense of your own history. And no matter if you're, new to Newfoundland or your ancestors have been here for, time immemorial, it does give you a different sense of that history. And it is a really powerful thing and just to see people's writing and, to hear their voices in a real, in that way. It's powerful.
This is the signal. Sorry, go ahead, Sonja.
I was just going to add to that, just in terms of the powerful nature of the letters, and also in terms of Gina's comment around the oral histories of things. Whenever we've talked about this project, we immediately get people who have stories from their families about how their families discussed Confederation and what it meant for them, what kinds of responses people had, and so on. So it is, even if most people today were not alive at Confederation, there are still some. They have family members, they have aunts and uncles, they have grandparents who talked about it. So it is still a living memory, how those conversations took place. And I think that's been really interesting as well, beyond the letters, is the conversations the letters spark.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes, yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, and the strong feelings. I mean, Smallwood was so polarizing. I mean, my mother writes a piece in here and talks about the family history in our house of, we were deeply divided. We were house divided. We were on either end. One set of grandparents thought Joey was just the best thing since sliced bread, and the other side thought he was, the devil incarnate.
Oh, one. I had the picture on the wall, and the other
holographic Joey.
Yeah, so that one, and then the other. My grandfather said, "Well, I did not vote to join Canada." So, and it was like, "Okay, Pop, got you."
Yeah. I mean, you want to start a racket at the supper table? Bring up Joey. Yeah.
Folks, you're listening to The Signal. I'm Adam Walsh. We're talking about a project to be put into a book called Letters to Joey, a collection of letters, telegraphs to the former Premier, Joey Smallwood. It's people's concerns, stories, their lives, their hopes, their dreams. I've got 4 historians here. Sonja Boon's on the line. And we've got Vicki Hallett, Heidi Coombs, Terry Bishop-Stirling here, folks. And if you have thoughts around these letters, or if you have one, or if there's anything, if this is sparking something you want to talk about, just email us, thesignal@cbc.ca. Call the Signal line and leave a message. We do play those on the show as well, 709-576-5260. I always love feedback. And Terry, what are your thoughts on just where we are right now in the conversation?
Yeah, the elderly lady who was destitute and asking about, well, I guess she was just asking for help. What can I do? Certainly the old age pension would have been useful for her. And there's certainly a lot of letters about family allowances, which were huge, turned out to be huge in my own family. So those are one set of letters, but there are also the huge number of letters. I sort of joke that you could, title it like "I voted for you. Where's my job?" I think that there are more like as Heidi started with the seed potatoes of. I need a job. I need more job security. I can't do this work anymore. And that's the other thing I found with the loggers. If you think about the work that our ancestors did, fishing, farming, mining, logging, and women working, having multiple pregnancies and, how hard housework is still awful, but how hard it was then, and hauling wood and hauling water and all of and trying to, dig out a garden out of a rocky patch, that people were worn out, physically worn out, quite young ages. So I saw letters from people that simply could not continue to work in the woods, cutting down trees with buck saws.
It destroyed their bodies.
Because there was a man who wrote that, he'd raised a family with one arm. And now the company is telling him he's disabled and they can't hire him anymore. But he still has a child at home. Yeah. Most of his children raised. And he's still much too young for old age pensions. So what's he going to do? Mm-hmm. And I think it resonated with me at that time because I was about to retire and, I had my aches and pains and all that kind of thing. And I thought, what if I had no medical care? Mm-hmm. And it's still long. Medical care is still, 20 years off from this now. We're almost 20 years away from this period when they're writing. How hard people worked. And what a toll it took on them.
And the toil. Mm-hmm. Angela Intel is on the line. Hi, Angela.
Hi.
How you doing?
I'm doing grand.
Good.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Angela.
Hi.
As always, nice to have you on the CBC Airways. Tell us about your involvement with the project.
Oh, I feel so honored to be part of this. I think Sonja asked me, she was one of my supervisors for my PhD, and I asked for Trinity South because that's where my paternal relatives are from Turks Cove, Trinity Bay, next to Winterton. And although there were no letters from that community, boy, did I ever get a more nuanced understanding of what life was like. And I've been listening to the show, and lots of people have made that point, but you have family stories. Like I have one family story that my grandfather, and it's in my essay in the book. My grandfather was very skilled at knocking seagulls out of the sky with beach rocks. Someone told me that if he hadn't been so skilled, they would have starved, during the Depression. So, yeah, they ate a lot of seagull. But that was the only story that I had from life in Turks Cove because my grandmother and grandfather left for central Newfoundland around the same time as Confederation when the mill was being built in Grand Falls. So reading through these letters, you just get such a sense of, the class divide, the lack of education, the lack of political power. And you guys have been talking about radio and how important radio was and how they felt they knew Smallwood, from the Barrel Man. It made, to me, it was like they all felt like they were part of this collective project of remaking Newfoundland. Mm. That's what the letters overall, after I read that, because I went back and forth to the archives several times. I loved handling the paper and really seeing people's writing and trying to decipher, their writing. But there was a kind of, they had a sort of political power in those letters. Would you agree, Vicki and Sonja?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And they pushed through all their limitations to God, they were writing to the premier.
Yeah. Yeah.
About, well, like you say, everything from I need a new pair of underwear and some sweet potatoes to, I need a job for my son. But yeah, those letters are fascinating. That archive is gold.
It is.
Yep.
And also, some people, speaking of political agency, some people wrote several letters, right? They didn't just write one.
Yes.
If they didn't get a response, they would write again, and then they would write again and again and again, right? So one of our contributors, Jennifer Morgan, follows a woman who wrote 8 letters to Smallwood and gets increasingly irritated. And it's hard to say whether he didn't receive her first letters or he passed it on. Hard to say why he didn't respond, because he did respond to a lot of letters. So why she didn't receive, did he send a response and she didn't get it? Not sure. But she gets increasingly irritated, and at a certain point she says, "No more hooey. Deal with this," right? So, and so you have people, that agency around saying, "I can write to you, and I'm going to write to you, and I'm going to keep going until I get a response."
I voted for you. You better help me out.
Yes, absolutely.
And I was really struck by, in my chapter, there were a couple of bills from merchant stores. And the family sent the bills, like their monthly bill, I guess, to Smallwood to show him how expensive foodstuffs were. But of course, looking at the prices now, they don't look expensive. But what struck me were how small the amounts were. So one family that had several kids and a horse to feed, they had 1 turnip, half a cup of apricot, an apple, a cabbage. I mean, how could you survive on that?
Angela, is it because a big part of the discussion today, it's poverty, right? Are folks forgetting or not realizing where, like, the journey that the province has made to be for where we are now? Because like the word destitute is coming out in my mind through this show today. I'm just wondering your thoughts on that.
Yes, for sure. Like, I have kids who are in their 20s, and I mean, I had no idea. And I'm 58. My kids have absolutely no understanding of what my grandparents went through. One correspondent said they earned $106 for their entire fishing season. And the widow's mite, or the widow's actual payment that they got, was something like $3 a month. It really is I think the whole book will really speak to the importance of the social welfare state as we enter into this new Trump presidency. It's a vivid reminder of why the social welfare state is needed.
Absolutely.
From healthcare to, whatever.
Angela Antle, thank you for your time, and I'll be in touch. I'll be in touch for the next chat we'll have in the coming weeks.
Sounds great. I really hope that Sonja and Vicki are able to reach people to make this book possible. To be able to publish it, because we need to hear from people about those letters.
Absolutely. Thanks, Angela.
Thanks, Angela. Cheers.
Okay, bye.
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 Sonja, any thoughts on what Angela was saying?
I think this notion of getting a picture of a community and getting a picture of what's happening in certain areas, I think, is super important. I mean, because I think that is something that you read it in abstract forms. A social studies textbook will say, well, the cost of living was such and such and such, and blah, 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 right? It's sort of a general, broad, exactly. But when you see it in people's own words and what it means to them, I think it's important. So there's one letter, for example, where a woman said, I was at the grocery store and I saw a woman hand over her family allowance check to buy groceries. She was buying, I think it was sugar, butter, and eggs. And when she got change back, she burst into tears. So this notion that you actually had money to spare, that you got change back and you actually had money, was just overwhelming. And I think reading those first-person accounts really makes these broad gestures that you might read in a social studies textbook come alive in some sort of ways, and makes it real in ways that you might not have imagined. These were real people. It wasn't just a story in a textbook. Real people struggling on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's perhaps the most important part of these letters.
Terry, what about yourself?
That particular letter was in Grand Falls District, and so that was certainly important to people. People they were hopeful, I think. A lot of people were hopeful that this was going to be a change, that they felt that the Smallwood was like them, that, he'd come up, there were a lot of letters that said, you came up like us, you came up the hard way, nothing was just given to you. And I'm not afraid to work. You saw that a lot of times.
Yep.
I saw a lot of the phrase that I never once ate a bit of dole. So sort of proud of that. But I need help. I need different work, or we need more regular work. And 2 young men wrote that they were working in the woods, but they'd get hired on in a camp, and then that camp would close, and then they just have to wander to the next camp and hope to get work. And it was all very irregular. And they quoted him. They said, you said there would be 2 jobs for every man once Confederation came.
Yeah, don't just say it. Like 2 jobs, that's a pretty specific thing.
They said, we voted for you 3 times, and we would vote 3 more times, and they ended the letter with, depending on getting a job out of this letter.
Right.
So people wanted work, and they were willing to work. A lot of them said, I'm not afraid of work.
Yeah.
Heidi, I know there's other stuff you've got here to
I
read
do.
from. I was like, I can sense your energy, and I'm not even looking at you now. I'm faced away from you, and I was like, okay,
I don't
go back
even
to
know
Heidi.
where to start here. There's so
No, we could be here for the rest of the week with these letters.
could,
Yeah.
but I think
No, seriously, it could be a podcast. I mean, like it would be easy.
Oh, good idea.
well, yeah, I got the saddest little letter here.
Sure,
I'll
with 9 minutes left, she'll bring us completely down and destroy us. If you could.
but I did want to change it up because so many women wrote these letters, and they were writing on behalf of themselves. They were advocating for themselves and their family members. And there's a nice one there from Bell Island that I might read a bit of.
Sure.
But
Whatever you want.
So the photo of Joey came up earlier, which reminded me of this letter. It is from White Bay. And it's also interesting to see how differently people address Smallwood. Like some people say very formally, "Dear Sir," "Dear Honorable Sir," and I saw someone else said, "Dear Friend." So he had that
Connection.
personal connection. Yeah. So this one is Honorable Sir. It is with the greatest pleasure that I am writing to you to congratulate you on your victory. You are one of the greatest men in the world. Today, when I heard what you was for, I said yes. If he comes on a ballot paper 1,000 times, I will vote for him 1,000 times, as you are the only man that ever tried to make Newfoundland anything yet. I would like to get a letter from you and a photo of yourself to hang over my table where I could see you all the time.
Wow, that's...
Mr. Smallwood, I am from a little place in Notre Dame Bay. I am 69 years of age. I am still going on the treaty shore fishing, me and my poor old partner in life. I goes fishing at a fishing ground, only the both of us. We have it very good when we go fishing. My wife is alone ashore, and I am alone in the boat. But we are happy enough with our lot. If we had a radio to get the news and divine program, we would be all set. And then he signs off respectfully yours.
I love that.
There's so much in that.
The amount of everything, yes.
Yeah.
And I think Vicki has a great letter that sort of shows kind of the opposite view of
Yes.
Smallwood.
I think it's only
You see
fair.
it?
Yes.
I think it's
Oh,
only
do it.
fair.
Do it.
Go
Allow
for
me
it.
the pleasure.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. This one starts off respectfully. Dear Sir. But then we get a change of tone. Well, you have completed your dastardly crime of Confederation against the wishes of half the population, and you have acted the Judas Iscariot and sold Newfoundland for a mess of pottage. Today's the birthday of my beloved father, and may his spirit haunt you in the years to come for having done this deed against the wishes of the people. We have not lost our spirit yet. We're still able to do many things, and I am afraid that the bed you have made for yourself and your wonderful government will be a hard one. It goes on, but I might set the microphone on fire if I keep going. But yeah, I mean,
there's a lot of feeling in that when
emotion.
you're trying to hunt someone, like there's feeling.
There's some feeling. So it's great. I mean, that one's from St. John's district. And as my mother wrote about this one in her reflection piece, and it's just classic because it really does encapsulate, the passion, right? The purple passion that people had, both in their hatred and their admiration for Smallwood. So it's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I add also that
yes, please.
What we haven't talked about yet is that there are some letters from children who wrote to Smallwood.
So good.
And so, some 10-year-old, 12-year-olds who wrote to Smallwood. And some of those people might still be alive today, having written to Smallwood. So one person, for example, he said, my father was sick, my sister is sick, we don't have enough to eat. And what he says, well, on my summer vacation, I had a misfortune with my bike, and it was broken. I couldn't get it fixed because it was broken too much to fix. And my father said, you would kindly see you could get a bike for me. And he wants a bike so that then he can make some money carrying mail for people and doing things more quickly, and that way he can support his family. So he writes to Smallwood to get a new bike. And he just says, I'm a poor boy. I thought I would get my grade 11, is what he's hoping for. So.
Wow, those kids were okay back then. Wow, that's quite the letter.
But that's something too, just picking up on something Sonja just said. Like these letters, people were trying their best to make a livelihood and make lives for themselves because this is their home. They love it here. And they could be very industrious with what they were coming up with as ways to make money, make a living.
Yeah, so many business ideas and the jukebox. Yeah, people wanted jukeboxes. They wanted licenses for selling homebrew.
So license for selling homebrew, jukebox, so to charge money to play the songs in the place where you're hanging out. Right on.
Yeah. I mean, and everything in between.
Help. Yeah. I lost my cod traps. Can you help me out here?
Yes. I
need an outboard motor.
Yeah, I had a letter from a woman whose husband worked irregularly there. She had a big family. She was hoping he could find her a relatively inexpensive house to rent in St. John's, and she would come in and take in boarders.
Right.
Yeah.
And fishermen writing in, like, why aren't fishermen included in this unemployment insurance scheme? Like, why don't we get unemployment? Like, who's taking more risks than fishermen? Why can't we get, So I did a reflection on in Bonavista, and that's where one half of my family is from. And just seeing, the Labrador fishery was collapsing again. And, they wanted to know what about all the gear that was destroyed in that terrible gale last winter, and how are you going to help us, and how are you going to help the fishermen? And that was a really important, thing for in that district. It was huge. So, and what's interesting, too, is how many petitions I saw in the letters that I read, signed by 50, 100 people in the communities. We need this. Our whole community's behind this, and reams of signatures. So again, that engagement,
level political
right?
Activism,
this grassroots activism that people were engaged in at the time.
There's 1 minute left. Sonja, you're still looking for letters until when?
We're looking for people who might have written to Smallwood and or who have who they think they have family members who wrote to Smallwood, to see if we can include the names of the authors of the letters in this book project. And the website is smallwoodletters.wordpress.com.
And when is all this going to be done and in book form? Do we know yet?
Well, great question. We're in the final stages, so we don't want to include anything new, although we could go on forever. We have actually, sort of completed our manuscript. Yep. And now, like Sonja said, we're really looking for the last sort of details. We're hoping to include names and places and full letters because, as we have been saying all this hour, it's so rich. So if we can include people's names and the places where they're from, we think it would, really paint a beautiful picture. So, if we can get people to give us their permission or the permission from their family, from their family member, that would be really great. So if people think that they have a family member who might have written to Smallwood, contact us through the website. And if you're on our list of letters we already have, we'd love to hear from you.
And when this is all done and out, can we do this again and talk some
please.
more about this? as
Yes.
letters? Okay.
There's so much more to say.
Yeah.
Can you tell we love it? Yeah.
Well, yeah, because like we're literally, I've got 45 seconds left, and the news is going to start. So this is great. I thank you for this today.
Oh, thanks so
I
much,
really
Adam.
enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Really
Yeah.
appreciate it.
All right, Vicki Hallett, Sonja Boon, Heidi Coombs, Terry Bishop-Sterling. Thank you so much. That's it for the show of the week and everything else, folks. Looking at Monday, we're still talking about Memorial University 100 years of educating folks in the province. We're going to hear about the Centennial 100, who celebrates folks who've had an impact either before or now on the university and their communities. That's Monday. Have yourselves a great weekend. I hope you get whatever you want from it, folks. Bye.
This is CBC News for Newfoundland and Labrador. I'm Sandy Noseworthy. Equinor has awarded contracts to a pair of companies in relation to the Bay du Nord project. Both BW Offshore and Altera will be working on engineering designs for the oil field's floating production systems. The Bay du Nord project has had a rocky history, with Equinor temporarily